And welcome back to Big Red Wired. I'm joined by Sam. We've got some more breaking news. Nebraska special teams coordinator Mike Ekeler is officially going to USC. But before we dive into that, be sure once again to like, comment, and subscribe. The channel, I believe, is now at 225 subscribers, so we continue to climb that trajectory. Be sure once again to follow ourselves on Twitter at bschneider33 and at SamOheda8. How are you doing, Sam? And what is your initial reaction to Ekeler officially gone?
Bobby, I'm doing good. I think my initial reaction is a lot like the Husker fans, not surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if this is something that is fixed in 24 hours. If Rule's already got his man, I'm sure there's been talks on the internal about that. This is a big blow for the Cornhuskers, one of the best special teams units, in the Big Ten this season. One of the best special teams unit Nebraska has seen in about a decade. And I think it's going to have an impact. But I think just for right now, the goal for me is to not overreact like some people out there.
It's tough, I think, for the fan base not to overreact at the same time because Nebraska had 7 kicks blocked. They count punts and kicks as kicks blocked on stats in 2024 under Ed Foley, which was, I believe, 132nd out of 134 FBS teams. Ekeler's unit did not permit a block this season. Nebraska, I believe, in fact, blocked 3 total kicks. And, of course, the highlight one was Carter Nelson's blocked kick or punt that led to a touchdown as well. Nebraska was no longer the University of Fair Catch with in punt returns. Nebraska was under, I believe, 4 yards or 5 yards per punt return in 2024. And this past season, they were over 12. I believe maybe even 13. Ja'Cory Barney was top 15 nationally returning. Kenneth Williams led the Big Ten in yards per return, nearly 33 yards. And then the coverage was incredible. Nebraska's punt return defense, I believe, allowed only 23 total return yards the whole season. So it's tough for the Big Red to lose somebody that is from David City, Nebraska. He's a Nebraska native, wanted to come back. But I don't know if you got to see anything or hear about what Rule said on the radio on Friday, but you could already tell that the writing was on the wall that Ekeler would be leaving.
Yeah, and I don't want to speak too much on their relationship, but I think you could tell, Rule was trying to handle it very professionally. From my very opinionated view of the press box, and then when you'd go and rewatch replays on TV, it seemed like maybe Rule wasn't all for what Ekeler was doing on the sideline. I think there were a lot of times that we have a lot of photos on our end with On 3 Sports and Husker Online of Rule looking upset at Mike Ekeler, and I think there's just little things about that relationship that I think did not bode well. And I think you could tell it in Rule's tone. You could tell it in his tone on the radio show when he was on the podcast last week. And I think, like you said, the writing was on the wall. And I think that's why this is not coming as a huge shock for everyone involved. And I truly think this will be something that's handled swiftly. And I don't even think we'll make note of come this time next year.
So you think that Nebraska will not skip a beat on special teams is what you're making a claim of?
Well, I think skip a beat is like not skip a beat. I think it might be stretching it, but I think the key pieces are still in place. Mike Ekeler is a very transcendent guy. You can tell when Mike Ekeler is in the room, right? And I think that he knew that it was working. Rule knew that it was working. And I think, he is going to try to keep the same scheme of aggressiveness, of returning the punt. I mean, if you have a weapon like Ja'Cory Barney Jr. back there, or whoever's going to be back there next season, right? So I would assume to him to he's talked many times about hiring from within, whatever that means for him. I think he's going to try to hire someone who's going to bring the same model to the special teams unit. And really, they're not losing a ton on special teams other than, the long snapper, which they have replaced with Jack Willis. They replaced Kevin Gellick with Jack Willis. Other than that, they're not really losing much. And so you'd expect kind of the same culture around the special teams unit, unless Rule intentionally hires in the opposite direction.
Yeah, and that appears unlikely at this moment in time. And then Ja'Cory Barney is officially returning, Rule confirmed. You assume that you're going to keep Archie Wilson, and that you're going to keep that rugby style punting. Now, people always said, well, Nebraska's net punting was this, but you're only allowing so many yards because you're rugby style punting it to essentially, I mean, you're punting into the wind and this and that. And he pinned several inside the 20 or inside the 10-yard line this year as well. But at the same time, I still think it's going to be tough to replace him. Just that type of energy he brought. And I think for Nebraska's fan base's sake, they had 2 years of rule with hiring a special teams, but he said he has this system now that he's learned. Now, will we see that? That's to be determined. I know the fan base right now is pretty checked out. It really is. In my lifetime, I haven't necessarily seen it this checked out, and I'm sure a lot of people are in agreement to that. But we could touch on Ekeler more, but it's breaking news, and I think we need to let the dust settle on it. But I want to talk about, before we get to some Big Red football, Indiana win the national championship. Holy cow, was that amazing.
Yeah, that was pretty sweet. I missed the first quarter last night. I was coaching my little brother's baseball practice, but I was able to catch the second quarter, most of the second half, and I was just really impressed with the soundness that Indiana played football with. We've been talking about that all year, the discipline they play with, that Kirk Cignetti is kind of a no-nonsense type of guy. He did smile last night after the game ended, big smile. Mentioned he was going to drink another beer because of the win, but this team just overall really impressed me in all facets of the game. And I think Indiana winning in 2 seasons is one of the reasons that the Husker fan base is so deflated. Just seeing how quickly Kirk Cignetti was able to take, I believe it was, I can't remember how much money they had invested into this team, much less than Nebraska. And they were able to turn it around in 2 years. And I think that just speaks to the greatness that Kirk Cignetti is as a coach. He didn't take the normal path of being a coordinator turned head coach. He was a positions coach turned assistant, or a positions coach turned low-level head coach, and he worked his way up. You don't see that anymore. And so I think there's a lot to read into about Indiana winning the national championship, but overall, just, man, it was an impressive season.
I put in our Husker Online forum last night after this play. I said, how can you not root for Mendoza?
Yeah.
That dude's a dog. I enjoyed the hell watching him play, and I think he will be the number 1 overall pick. But my favorite thing about watching him play is you see that heart displayed. And then in his post-game interview, he brought up, I wanted to walk on at Miami. I was a 2-star recruit. They told me no. And there was reports actually the day of the national championship, the Miami last year was trying to pursue Mendoza to get him to go to Miami instead of to Indiana, and he ultimately stuck with the Hoosiers. And I think it overall paid off for him pretty well.
Yeah, he's going to earn himself millions of dollars in bonuses and salary in the NFL. He's got, one of the 2 most coveted trophies in all of college football, and likely a spot in the College Hall of Fame in his future.
Shoot, and he's probably even better on the mic. Or we could even say he's better on the mic than we are. He nails an interview every time. He did, I believe, drop an F-bomb on the stage last night, if I recall.
Goodness gracious, Fernando Mendoza.
Yeah, out of all people. He's so PR trained, looking in that camera and everything. I do got to ask you, well, I'll just put it this way. When I watched Indiana last night, and I grew up, watching reruns of the 1995 Fiesta Bowl, 94 Orange Bowl, and how Nebraska played these teams and wore them down physically. Watching the defensive backs from Indiana just in the face, deflecting passes, the linebackers getting home on blitzes. It kind of reminded me of watching that old rerun of the Fiesta Bowl where Nebraska played Florida and stuff. And then you see Indiana gets up, their fullback has a touchdown. I bet it for Nebraska, it was Nebraska's fan base. It's kind of odd because it's a team in red from the Midwest playing Miami, in Miami for the whole thing, and Indiana wore them down.
Yeah, you talked about the defensive backs and the physicality you play with. If you go back and watch the game, there were plenty of plays where there was no sagging off of those receivers, off of those I would argue the most athletic receiving room in the country that Miami has. I mean, Tony is an elite wide receiver. That kid is impressive. He is everything that Nebraska fans want your Corey Barney to be. And I think that's another thing on both sides of the field. You got to see Nebraska fans struggle with a little bit of heartbreak, but absolutely, Indiana brought physicality. Like I said, it was press coverage almost the whole entire night on some of the fastest receivers in the country, and they weren't scared. They were ready. They didn't commit. I don't think they committed a penalty in the secondary. They had the one false start in the fourth quarter that could have potentially cost them a game, but it was clean football, and it was aggressive football, and it was nitty gritty. And I think you are spot on in saying that I think it flashed back a lot of, older Husker fans to the 90s.
But I will say, for Nebraska's sake, you have to be a little bit encouraged. This is a team with no 5-star recruits. I believe they had 7 or 9 4-stars on the roster. They're taking on Miami, who's full of that. Tons of from transfers and everything. And don't get me wrong, Indiana had a lot of high quality transfers you've seen displayed in future pros. I believe you have the number 1 overall pick and everything. But at the same time, I think if you're Nebraska, you're encouraged. It's a Midwest school from the Big Ten that 2 years ago was one of the most laughing stocks of college football, had the most losses of any program in the history, and yet they just pulled off the best season record-wise since 1894 with Yale.
Yeah, and I think, again, this is a Husker-focused show, so I am comparing and contrasting Nebraska and Indiana. It is a stark difference with how the two coaches approach their team, right? So you look at Matt Rule. He is all about bringing in the right type of players and developing them. Well, so is Kurt Cignetti. Here's the thing, is Kurt Cignetti has done it. Has completely, if you look at that receiver, I don't remember his name right now, but that receiver earned himself draft stock this season because he stuck with Indiana. The guy who is going to made every contested catch this season. He didn't have a single drop all season long. And he was the only receiver from the wide receiver room when Kurt Cignetti got there that stuck with the team. And now he's earning himself potentially a place in the draft this season because of how impressive he was catching the ball in coverage. And I think another thing off the football field, 2 completely different approaches when it comes to how they want their team represented, right? You have Matt Rule, who started the podcast this season. I know a lot of people talk about it, but started the podcast this season. They were doing tons on social media. And Nebraska Athletics took such a big marketing approach to just have Nebraska football explode on social media and YouTube and X, Y, and Z. And they do a fantastic job of it. I'm not complaining about Nebraska Athletics, but that's the approach that Matt Rule took to his team. Kurt Cignetti, now granted, he is older and, he comes from the lower ranks of college football in terms of his head coaching experience, but he did not take that approach at all. There was really no marketing for this team until they were hitting 5-0, 6-0. And that's when you were seeing really the social media presence explode. I kind of went into a deep dive on Instagram and X last night just to kind of look at the comparisons. And I think it's very clear that there are 2 approaches to doing things. And if you look at guys like Nick Saban, you look at guys like Kurt Cignetti, you look at guys like Kirby Smart, there is no explosive brand marketing done at all. And they're arguably 3 of the greatest coaches in college football history.
Well, I think if you're a Nebraska fan now and you hear that, you wonder what the long-term trajectory is going to be when it comes to that, something like that. And but that leads me into our next topic. We haven't had you on the podcast since the Huskers have landed Anthony Calandria, Sam. Just what stands out to you about the former Rebel and Cavalier?
Yeah, Calandria, I will go on record saying that he's better than Dylan Raiola. I think there's no debate in that. 2 completely different skill sets, so it's kind of hard to draw direct comparison. But what you're recruiting and what you're bringing into Nebraska is something they've been needing for a while, and that is experience, right? The only thing I worry about is the turnover problems, right? The last quarterback that Nebraska brought in through the transfer portal to start with a lot of experience and turnover problems was Jeff Sims, okay? Very similar quarterbacks, strong-armed, can scramble, but they have turnover problems, right? Jeff Sims, there was a lot of hype around him when he came into Nebraska from the portal, and I'm getting a similar vibe with Calandria. Okay, here's the deal. He is a big presence off the field. He's a big presence on the field. You could call him Diego Pavia Jr. if you really wanted to. There's a lot of clips on social media about him, doing some wild things on the field and off the field and X, Y, and Z. But I think it's controlled enough that he's not going to be a PR problem for Nebraska, which I know is huge for the Cornhusker brand. In terms of the football, 6 foot, 205, can run like the wind, has a ton of experience. And I think Rule was quoted when saying this and talking about Kalandria, that he needed someone that could play with a little bit of recklessness, right? Not like recklessness where it's out of control, but recklessness to where he'll go win a ball game based on his skills and not necessarily go win a ball game based on what, he had been told he needed to do for the 6 months leading up to the game, right? He is just a baller who's going to go make plays. And I think that with a lot of Nebraska's late game problems over the last, 10 years, not necessarily this year, they were pretty good in the late game this year, winning more one-score games than we thought. But in past history, I think they've just needed a baller who's going to go make a play. And I think that is good. So I see a lot of pros and cons with Kalandria, and really just more unknowns and how Dana's going to work the system around him.
One thing that stood out to me when Matt Rule spoke on the radio this past Friday was that he said, we got somebody, or I'm kind of paraphrasing this, but he did say, we got somebody that can let Dana be Dana Holgorsen. That was interesting. And he also, when he was talking about Daniel Kalen, he said, Danny is a guy who wants to be at Nebraska, not to be at Nebraska for what Nebraska could do for them. Now, that almost, some people were speculating that was a shot, but I don't know. I don't think it was necessarily directed at a former quarterback or a special teams coordinator that was at Nebraska. I don't necessarily think I'm going to pin those at anybody, but that was interesting.
No, you are. I can tell you're kind of doing it. No, because I had the same read. I had the same read, and I think Rule is ready to not have to deal with big personalities. I think, and you could start that going against them getting Kalandria, but him saying that Dana can now be Dana, I think is him leaning into the idea that the Raiolas maybe had a little bit too much control over the program. I'm not saying that is how it is one way or another, but some people can read into it that way, right? And I think people are going to read into that way. And so if you are someone who's just taking it at face value and doesn't know anything behind the scenes, you might think that. And I think that's fair, Bobby. I think it's fair for people to interpret it that way. Is that exactly what he meant? Maybe, maybe not. We don't know. We can't really fully say whether or not, but it's a fair thing to pull from what he said.
Absolutely. Sam, now a big concern for Nebraska has been in the trenches. I felt that Nebraska did really well adding 3 quality offensive linemen. Defensive line, Nebraska added several pieces. What was your takeaway, though? Because none of them were that big name. Nebraska swung and missed on several defensive linemen that visited or were going to visit and wound up going elsewhere.
Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway on the D-line is that it was an unstable situation in the coaching room. I think that is one of the main reasons that this didn't happen. Now, is it Berbeha? Is that how you say the kid from Iowa Western? Berberia. Okay, so that situation's a little bit different. And you can go check out the On3 thread if you really want to find out what the situation was behind that. Sean did a great write-up on it. But, everyone else, I think Nebraska brought in starters, which I think is huge. But they brought in starters enough to where it's going to encourage guys like Keona Davis. It's going to encourage guys like Willis McGahee. It's going to encourage Riley Van Poppel to get better, right?
Well, wait. I'm sorry. Keona Davis is gone.
He's gone. But what I mean? Getting the defensive line room to be better and not necessarily bring in auto starters. And I think that's really important because, with a new defensive coordinator, some new defensive coaches, you want to give the idea of that anyone can go for those jobs. And this made me, drinking the Rule-Aid a little bit, which we talked about off camera, that can be a little bit of a homer sometimes, but I almost appreciate, you maybe wanted one nose tackle that was like, absolutely, that's your day one guy. But you look at the linebacker room as well to extend beyond the defensive line, right? You're bringing in a lot of guys that are good players, proven players, but they're not necessarily like day one showing up to campus the starter, right? There's still room for, Vincent Shavers, Willis McGahee, all of those guys to go compete for a job. And I think that's what I really like about this portal class. It's a little bit different on the offensive side of the ball. But on the defensive side of the ball, that's exactly what I'm seeing.
Well, I think you could, as of today, you can pencil in Chambliss, you can pencil in McDougal, the 2 San Diego State transfers, McDougal to safety and Chambliss the linebacker. I think you pencil those 2 automatically in as starters, highly likely. But yeah, I know what you mean. Guys like Dexter Foster, Will Hawthorne at the linebacker position. Those are guys you think that could potentially play a quality role for Nebraska going forward, but they're not guaranteed starters. They brought in several dudes in the secondary as well that you like the ability that they bring, but they're not guaranteed as well. So you like the competition you're going to see across the board. Quasi Gilmer at wide receiver, yes, he's going to be a starter with Ja'Cory Barney and Isaiah Hunter. You like how that room looks.
Will he, though? Is he a guaranteed starter? I mean, you cannot overlook Quinn Clark
he
and
led
Cortez
UCLA in
Mills.
receiving yards.
I understand. Now, granted, Dane Key is a very different kind of player, right? He was extremely important in Nebraska's exterior running game. But you brought in a guy that you thought was an instant starter, and then he got double teamed a couple games, but you would say he was incredibly underwhelming. And I would say that Quasi Gilmore is not even the level of Dane Key. Who's to say that Cortez Mills doesn't gain 12, 15 pounds and immediately moves up the depth chart? I'm saying there's nothing set in stone. I think the only receiver who is absolutely set in stone as a number 1, day 1 starter, 1 on the depth chart is Isaiah Hunter. I think even Ja'Cory Barney is looking at potentially battling for the 3 spot. I think that wide receiver room is
I can agree that
open.
Isaiah Hunter is the number 1 wide receiver at Nebraska going forward. Hands down, he performed. But I see with Gilmer is what I see with what Hunter was last year production wise. It was a guy that had about 400 to 500 yards and everything. And I think that he will be a better receiver than Dane Key was, because this guy, he seems like he's more of a go up and get the ball rather than Key was he had these moments. He had the one-hander against Maryland, but Key wasn't necessarily a one-on-one threat. He's more of a possession receiver.
And it pissed me off that they were playing him on the outside. I understand you have Ja'Cory Barney Jr., but look at his my favorite play of his. I think they were playing Michigan State, and he ran he was lined up in the slot. He ran a 10-yard in route to the middle of the field. Raiola hit him, and then he runs for a touchdown. That's how he played at Kentucky. He wasn't an outside guy. And so then he comes in, and it was baffling to me that they stuck him on the outside all season when the most of his production was coming over the middle of the field until they started to try to force feed him on the outside. It pissed me off.
Well, you prove a good point, and it makes you going in this year, no matter what your starters are, you expect Quinn Clark and Jeremiah Jones to be guys that are on the field quite a bit.
Cortez Mills is in there. He was good.
No, I do too. I guess I'm sorry. I'm talking about big old tree trunks out there.
Sure,
tall, length. You like those there. And
don't forget about Bonner too. Don't forget about Bonner.
And you're right, Bonner. So Bonner, with the way I read it right now, he's coming back from an ACL, and that know how that can go. But I could almost see them. He ain't going to be, and they've done it before, kind of hybrid tight end. I think that he's that wing guy. Almost similar to how they kind of blocked with Harburg. Now it totally depends on Mac Markway, Carter Nelson. Those two, are they going to be healthy? Are we going to see the Carter Nelson, the prospect we were expecting at Nebraska this year? It's his 3rd year in school. Luke Sorensen's a highly recruited tight end out of California that could come in and play as a freshman as well. But you feel solid about that. And I just think this offense is going to be a little bit electric. But Sam, I think we've kind of touched on as much as we can for off-season football talk today. And I think we got something else to talk about, and that is the 18-0 Nebraska Cornhusker basketball team that you've been covering. My goodness, they just keep rolling.
Wow. Yeah, it's impressive, Bobby. I just really, this team has been a blast to cover. I didn't actually have to cover the last game. So I got to watch it as a fan, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Don't get me wrong. covering them is my favorite thing in the world, but sometimes it's really nice to watch. I'm a student of the school, right? I love to watch the team as a fan as well. Thoroughly enjoyed that. This team has been explosive. I think Braden Frager is running away with the Big Ten Sixth Man of the Year award. Freshman of the Year, I wouldn't put him there yet. The Washington freshman that Nebraska is going to face tomorrow is one of the best players in the Big Ten. I think he's probably going to get the award. But Braden Frager is Sam Hoiberg's the X factor, right? But Sam Hoiberg's the X factor every game. Braden Frager is the most underrated player in the Big Ten. I think, even coaches are not talking about him enough. I'm sitting in these press conferences, and it's all about Sanford's shooting ability. It's all about how the offense runs through Mass, which is so true. But Braden Frager and Price Sanford right now might be the hottest duo in the country, which is crazy to say because Frager is coming off the bench. But I have to look again. Nebraska's offensive efficiency when they are both on the court at the same time is like astronomically higher than their team average. And they both put up north of 20 points in the last 2 games. And I really think they're figuring out how to work in the system while allowing Mass to not necessarily take a back seat, but he is able to worry about being more of an operator and less of a scorer, which I think is huge for this team.
Well, and I didn't even realize it till I seen your article published at the end of the game. I knew that both Sanford and Frager were popping off, but didn't they combine for 42 or 44 points or something?
42, 22 and 20.
Yeah, that's, I mean, when you're having your 6 man and then arguably not even I know Sanford just some games just pops off and goes wild, and that's what's crazy about this team. We've talked about it before. You can have anybody pop off any night. We can get 20 from Lawrence. Mass is kind of considered the primary scorer for the Huskers in a sense, but then you can have, option 2 and then maybe I'd say option 3 is Frager right now.
I would say this team has 4 direct options. So Sanford's at 16.7, Mass is at 15.1, but keep in mind the last 2 games, Mass has been able to play south of 25 minutes. So I think that's a big indicator there. And ranked Mass is dead cold from 3. Entering after the Illinois game, he was shooting 45% from 3-point, which was the best of, I think he was the 3rd highest forward 3-point percentage in the country. Now he's down to 35%. So he's gotten dead cold. But like I said, he's taking more of an operator role. But then you have Braden Frager, who is just dynamic. And, that's going to be, keeping him is going to be a conversation that's going to come this offseason. But Jamarcus Lawrence is averaging 10 points a game. Sam Hoiberg averaging 8.4 and probably the most impressive rebounder in the country for his size. And then you're forgetting the defensive cement block of this team, and that's Berke Buchtenjel. He went up against Martinelli last week. Martinelli had exploded in the first half because Berke was dealing with foul trouble. And then in the second half, Berke starts. He gets his 3rd foul. He stays in the game without fouling, and Martinelli only scores, who's the 2nd best scorer in the country, by the way, only scores 2 points in the first 10 minutes of the second half, which allowed Nebraska to extend that lead. He had to guard Nate Biddle of Oregon 2 games ago and did a fantastic job against one of the better big men in the country. So I think Berke Buchtenjel is another underrated player. And then you could just keep going down the list. Jared Garcia gives very productive bench minutes. Sometimes he takes some interesting shot selections, but he gives them that bench rebounder when Mast or Hoiberg have to go to the bench. This team is so deep. It is all around a great team. And you are looking, Jared Garcia is the 8th guy on the roster, 8th man in the rotation. He would be, starting next to Derek Walker 5 years ago. For Fred Hoiberg's team. And I think that really shows to just how amazing of a developmental coach Nate Lesnar and Fred Hoiberg are. And I could go on and on and on about this team, but it's been such a ride this season.
What can you tell us about this Washington freshman? What else Washington will bring? And then also big game on the road at Minnesota this coming, I believe, Saturday.
Yeah, Washington's an interesting team because they are loaded with talent. Okay, so this team, they recruited, he was, I believe, according to On3, the 21st overall player in the country for his recruiting class. He's a freshman. His name is Haynes. I think it's Haynes. It's Hannes. I think it's Haynes Steinbach. He averages 17.8 per game, which is more than anyone on Nebraska's team. He is not much of a three-point shooter. He only has 7 makes in the season, so you don't have to necessarily worry about and he's 7 for 25 for 28%. So he's not like he's great at, so you don't have to worry about that, which is going to allow Nebraska to guard the interior. But he's shooting 55% overall, which I think is really impressive. He gets to the line a lot. He's got 83 attempts at the line already this season. He moves really well. He's got 64 makes. They've played 18 games, so that's a little over 3 free throw makes a game. So he gets to the line at a high clip. And he's a very solid rebounder. I think that's the thing about him is nothing necessarily is like absolutely he's elite. He's just a great all-around player, and it helps that he is the clear, that he's had to be the number 1 option for a team that was supposed to be shooting a lot higher than they are. And then Nebraska opens as an 11.5 point favorite at home, which is of no surprise. But then you go to the Minnesota game, and the Minnesota game is one that I'm actually legitimately worried about. Not worried like I would be 3 years ago. And they're going to Minnesota, but Nebraska always struggles at Minnesota. For some reason, Nebraska always has issues at Minnesota. And Minnesota is a very well-coached team. They're 3-4 in the league, which I think, that's different than facing the around 500 teams like Northwestern that doesn't have a win in the league. But the good thing for Nebraska is that they have lost 3 straight. So they've lost to Illinois by 10, they lost to Wisconsin by 3, and they lost to USC by 1. So they're not getting absolutely blown out. They beat Northwestern by 14. They beat Iowa at home by 3. They have, they're actually playing right now. Ohio State's up on them by 1 point right now towards the end of the first half. So this is a team that's going to give Nebraska issues. And I think as being the game before Michigan on the road, I don't want to necessarily throw trap game. I don't want to throw that title on this just with how dominant Nebraska has been. But this is a game I worry about, just like I did about Ohio State. I was not worried about Indiana based on how Nebraska matched up, but I was against Ohio State, and I would put a similar type of worry when it comes to this Minnesota game. I expect Nebraska only to be favored by about 5.5 or 6.
I mean, still going on the road, who would have thought Nebraska likely will be at 19-0 going on the road to Minnesota, try to get to 20 wins. We appreciate that great analysis. That was freaking awesome, Sam, by the way. I normally just watch the games and say, oh man, Irish Spring, Price Sanford, another green release from the tree. But anyway, and anyhow, Sam, one last thing before we close out the show. What is your thought as a Yankees fan on the Dodgers picking up another big name?
Yeah, so I am a pretty diehard Yankees fan. I have been since I was a little kid, and there's a whole story behind it. I'm not just a bandwagon. I've been very disappointed with the Yankees offseason. They're at a stalemate with Cody Bellinger right now. Kyle Tucker goes to the Dodgers, so they're looking like they're going to tack on another World Series. And Brian Cashman and Aaron Boone have done jack squat, and I'm getting upset, Bobby. That's how I feel.
Hey, it could be worse. You could be a Colorado Rockies fan and never have any hope to be good in the sport, but it's all right. My New England Patriots are going to win the AFC Championship and win the Super Bowl. Drake May and Mike Vrabel, the best duo since Bill Belichick and Tom Brady. I just had to throw that in there. But guys, thank you all for listening. If you want to sponsor the show, shoot me a message. You can email me at schneiderbobby03@gmail.com. Be sure once again to follow Sam and myself on Twitter at SamOheda8 and at bschneider33, and keep up to date with Sam's Nebraska basketball coverage. For Bobby Schneider and Sam Ojeda, signing off.